What you say now? 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 What you say now?
All right, it is Monday, December 16th, 2019. We're almost at the end of the year. I am King Williams. I am a weekly columnist at the Supporter Report. The Supporter Report is the home of the most important news and information in Atlanta, your day-to-day reporting, as well as your big things coming out of the Capitol, as well as City Hall. I'm also here on behalf of the Neighborhood Watch podcast, also through the Supporter Report and my own channel. And we are talking today to our first person of the faith-based community, which is Dr. Jamal Bryant. Dr. Jamal Bryant has been here with Birth Missionary Baptist Church for 1 year now.
Yes.
And he is now coming in as the pastor of a very historic Metro Atlanta church, New Birth, which has been in Atlanta for over 30 years. It was pastored formerly by Eddie Long, who has now deceased.
Yes.
And you've come to New Birth from Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah.
And you've come on the midst of a national search with some really big names in the faith-based community, and you were chosen to be the leader of New Birth. And so we're going to talk a little bit about just you being here 1 year in and what that's been like. And so for the people at home or the people who read the Supporter Report or Atlanta Business Chronicle or anything like that, who are you and how would they know you?
Yes. I'm Pastor Jamal Harrison Bryant. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm a third-generation AME preacher. AME is the oldest black denomination in America that is birthed out of liberation theology. I grew up in Baltimore, came to Morehouse on probation, and graduated on grace. And I'm here now 25 years later serving as the pastor. My former life, I was a National Youth and College Director of the NAACP under Kwesi Mfume. And then I started a young adult hip-hop church in Baltimore called the Empowerment Temple. We started with 43 people and mushroomed to 10,000. I was one of the leaders during the Freddie Gray Uprising and one of the advisors for the family of Trayvon Martin.
Okay. And we're going to start there first, which is in 2019, the state of black ministry, for a lot of people who don't know what it is now, it seems to be a lot of people commenting from the outside looking in. And for you in particular, you being the pastor of a very large denomination in Baltimore, now a very large denomination in Atlanta, what is something you want to tell people that people may be getting misconstrued about what faith-based leadership looks like now?
Faith-based leadership doesn't have the option of being selective in terms of what are the current issues. Millennials want to know not just about can you pray and preach, but what do you do after the benediction? How do you exercise, model, and walk out your faith? So it goes back to the old axiom that your actions have to speak louder than your words. And so there's a growing base of young adults who openly say that they believe in God but don't subscribe to organized faith or organized religion because they don't see the witness being transparent or effective.
Okay. And with that, sir, you've also mentioned that you, in terms of Freddie Gray and Trayvon Martin, and for a lot of people nationally, it seems if you were one of the few black preachers in particular who have made a stance and a very public stance about social justice and social injustice. Yeah. And why is that in particular? It seems like so many members of the faith, especially prominent pastors like yourself, have just not done that.
Let me say that there were clergy involved at every level. Okay. For Freddie Gray, for Trayvon Martin, for Michael Brown in Ferguson. And it wasn't necessarily recognizable names or faces, but pastors in those local communities who have been doing the heavy lifting and the hard work. And I don't want to besmirch their sacrifice that they were making. So many times those who have a larger platform helicopter in, but those who are really doing the grunt work are ignored and overlooked. And so I want to extend a high salute to the pastors who are making a mega impact, even if they don't pastor a mega church.
Okay. Yeah. And another thing about relation to the mega church, which is that in the age of Instagram, it seems as if every pastor right now is having to compete with just things they see online. And you as a leader of a very large church, how is that having to deal with like so many people watching or getting your ministries online and not necessarily coming into the church?
I think it speaks to the trend of the era that we're in. We are a week away from Christmas. And 10 years ago, we were having this dialogue. Neither of us could get on the parking lot of Perimeter, Greenbrier, Lenox, or Phipps. But today, people are doing online shopping. Like in similar fashion, people are doing online worshiping. New Birth Church can hold at capacity 8,500 people, but I am able to preach to some 40,000 people a week online. And so for me to shut that down would really be spiting my nose for my face, because it's really the trend of the culture.
Right. And in between, and also with regards to that, is that the Instagram account of yourself seems to be one of the more active accounts, and it also seems to be one of the few in which the comments aren't necessarily as divisive or as toxic as they could be for others.
Yes.
Is that just a byproduct of who you are as a person, or what's been happening at New Birth?
I think it's a combo platter.
Okay.
It also speaks to what it is that I post. Is more for unifying and not divisive. However, you would see a retraction if you go through my page when I say something about Trump. You've got a large demographic of evangelical Christians who support him, endorse him, pray for him, walk with him. I'm not one of those. Or you'll see other voices and opinions when I made comments about Kanye West and redirected some of those funds to Mars Brown College because I don't align with his politics. And so in those areas, you'll find where there are varying opinions that emerge.
Okay. And speaking about Kanye West in particular, how did that actually happen?
Which?
The Sunday service aspect.
Yes. They called and asked to come. Okay. And we graciously let them in. I was excited about it. Had the largest number of millennials and Gen Xers and Zs in our sanctuary. It was bigger than Easter. I was grateful. Hundreds were outside 6 o'clock in the morning just to be exposed to the gospel and this cutting edge approach to worship. And so for that end, I was very excited.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you a question that some people want to ask, which is, do you believe that Kanye West was doing it as a stunt, or was that something that he truly believes that he is a renewed man in Christ and that he is expressing the gospel in the way he knows fit?
I think that he is sincere about what it is that he believes in his faith walk and journey. I don't think at all that it is a stunt. He has no reason to. That he could go to Mercedes-Benz Stadium and fill it without singing gospel songs. So he didn't need to come here in order to get a stage. And so I think that he's sincere in his evolving.
Okay. And one of the other things I've noticed, which is that since you've been at New Birth, and again, I could be wrong. This is someone from outside looking in. I've noticed what you've done with the Kwanzaa Festival, and I've also noticed what you guys are doing and just some of the more social initiatives.
Yes.
Is that something that was already going on at New Birth, or is this something new that you brought to the table?
I think they have always been a community church. Mine is just more narrowed in on Black empowerment, where it was more general in days gone by. And so my perspective is more Afrocentric and diasporic as to how I approach things. But they've always been a community involved and engaged congregation.
Okay. And that's one of the other things I noticed, which is that even just with some of the books here in your study, is that there are a lot of Black books in particular about empowerment.
Yes.
And that seems to be a little bit different compared to like what we've kind of seen the last couple of years about Black, not necessarily empowerment, but just the prosperity gospel. You seem to kind of take a different approach to that.
Yes.
Is that just something that's emanating from who you are? Or is that something you thought was a better lane to be in?
I think it's who I am.
Okay.
I lived a year in Liberia, West Africa. I lived a year in Johannesburg, South Africa. Worked for 4 years, as aforementioned, for the oldest and largest civil rights organization. As I said in my introduction, I'm from the oldest African American denomination, so it's a part of the core of my DNA of who it is that I am as a black man who serves God.
Right. And there was something else I thought was really interesting, which was the bailout campaign. And can you speak more on that?
Yeah. I think that regrettably the black church has been the epicenter for funerals and not for life. And so when you look at the growing number of African Americans who are flushed in the prison pipeline, they don't see the church as a resource or as a restoration center. I argue, King, out loud that Malcolm X was the son of a Baptist preacher. And while in jail, he became a Muslim. And the question that I ask is, while he was in jail, did any of his father's deacons go visit him? While he was in jail, did any of the ushers check on the pastor's son? What kind of a voice and an asterisk would it have been for the black church had Malcolm X or Malcolm Little came out restored in his Christianity? And where we dropped the ball, the Nation of Islam was able to pick it up and make a slam dunk. And so I'm always intentional about how it is that we regard black men and what it is that we do.
And in regards to black men in particular with empowerment, what does empowerment look like for black men to you?
Yeah, I think that the empowerment of black men is holistic in terms of their health. Black men have the shortest lifespan of any citizens in the country in terms of wealth. That the average black man doesn't have $500 in savings account. In terms of home ownership or land development, New Birth boasts that we are the largest continuous black landowner of any church in Georgia, yet America, with 280 acres. And so what it is that we have to do in terms of land development, economic development, has to be replicated over and over again. The Bible said that the oil starts at the head and then flows down. It's also got to be in terms of training and education. I am grateful. I am the first to go to Morehouse with a GED, but also have a doctorate degree. And so how I do ministry speaks to both lanes of what I represent, those who flunked out of high school and those who excelled. And so the church ought to be the crossroads between the ideology of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And if we don't meet that, then I think that we're really impotent in our strength and our focus.
And that's been one of the things that's really kind of got me aware of you on your radar. I knew you were coming to New Birth. I knew you were a name coming out of Baltimore. But when I actually kind of went through some of your videos online and some of the Instagram accounts, I was like, this is a very different kind of pastor than we've seen in Atlanta in a long time. Okay. And I mean, not to say that aren't pastors saying what you're saying or doing what you're doing, but on this level of platform, it would seem antithetical, because it seems as if it's bad business to kind of do what you're doing, like to talk about injustice, to talk about, you know, maybe like when we mentioned Malcolm Little, like did the church drop the ball here? That seems against the grain. Is that something that you're aware of, and is that something that you're trying to avoid?
No, I think that when you look at Atlanta, that is looked at as the 21st century Harlem, that we are emerging in terms of black business, black wealth, black education, but there is white noise when it comes out of the church. I think that the culture mandates it. This is, for God's sakes, the home of the Trap Museum. And so if we don't have a gospel that speaks to that, then we're still on AM radio while the rest of the world's on satellite.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, is because 21 Savage came to New Birth, is that correct?
Yes. And
it seems as if you've been reaching out an olive branch to like a lot of the younger rappers again. And it's something we have. It's easy to kind of bring in people when they want to donate money, but it seems like you're making a genuine effort to kind of reach people who are reaching the young people.
Yes.
And how has that been in particular with dealing with 21 Savage and also just some of the newer rappers and entertainers here in Atlanta?
Root Magazine, which is our generation's Ebony, gives out their 100 influential African Americans. The last 2 years, I shuddered to my core because of the 100 most influential black Americans. No pastor. Which bespeaks what is the voice and the strength of the black church. but it's replete with a number of rappers and entertainers. And so I'm reaching out to those who, quite frankly, have more influence than me, and figuring out how it is that we can tie our boat to their sail, because that's the demographic I want to reach and the ones I want to impact.
Right. And in the case of 21 Savage, it was interesting because he is a black male, but he is a black male who comes from an immigrant background in Atlanta. And New Birth does have a large number of black immigrants.
Yes.
So how is that now being 1 year in with a pastor of a church that has a large number of black immigrants?
Yes. I think that we are really global in our construct, that if we have a global marketplace in our ministry, how do I not speak to immigration? How do I not say anything about children in cages at the border? How do I not say anything about the discrepancy of those who get visas from Europe as opposed to those come in from the Caribbean? How do I not say anything about America giving no aid to the Bahamas after the wreckage? How do I not give any redress that we made a pledge after Haiti was bombarded by natural disaster of $1 billion? And to this day, we've not stroked one check. And so I think it's my responsibility to deal with the prophetic mantle of the black church. It's not about cars and clothes and houses, but speaking to structures and the systems and to governmental principalities. And I think that's what the historic black church was about. And when you deal with Dr. King, who is the son of this soil, that's what this generation needs and necessitates.
Okay. And speaking about this generation in particular, what is the one thing you misunderstood about dealing with this generation as from a pastoral standpoint?
Yeah. I am a citizen of both generations, being a Gen Xer, trying to reach millennials. And so I inherited things from baby boomers that don't transfer. And so my wake-up call was going to Ferguson. I preached out of a mantle because my civil rights mentors were boomers. Kwesi Mfume, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson. And so I was preaching a politics that was assimilationist. So in order for you to make your mark in the world, pull your pants up. Don't have any tattoos. Don't put grills in, because that for me was the model that you need to have a suit and tie on. And I was speaking out of a civil rights lens and not a Black Lives Matter. And so Ferguson was my rites of passage of realizing that I needed to shift my language and my mindset of how it is that we move forward to really speak truth to power.
And going through the last few years, like I said, like finding out about you via the internet and looking at some of the things you've done in terms of Ferguson and Baltimore, and then what people have known you for as well, you seem to have changed over the last few years. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, yeah. No,
Okay.
I've evolved, as I pray all of us have. Muhammad Ali said, if you're the same man at 50 as you were at 30, you've wasted 20 years of your life. So I'm always evolving. Jesus himself for 30 years was a carpenter. Only 3 years did he operate as a savior. So 85% of his life, he was doing what he wasn't supposed to do. And so I hope that I've evolved, changed, developed, and matured as a man and as a Christian.
Okay, and I want to stick on that for 1 minute, which is that over the last few years, like I said, you've evolved and you definitely changed. Is there something that you wish you could have done differently over the last few years?
I think that John Maxwell's book really bespeaks where I wish that I'd been. It says that name of his book is Talent is Not Enough. I spent a lot of my years in ministry developing my talent, but not developing my character. And so as a consequence, it impacted my ministry, my image, my brand, and my fatherhood. As absence of character led to my divorce, the dismantling of my marriage, the hemorrhaging of my family, and the stifling of my ministry. And so if I were to go back, I wish I would have spent more time on character than I did on talent.
And And speaking of character, one of the things I've loved seeing from your, at least again from online, this is my first time meeting you, which is that you seem to have really placed an emphasis on mentorship.
Yes.
From a place of a man who's made mistakes, but also who's seen and stepped up when it mattered the most. Like you're showing a totality of yourself in terms of your mentorship.
Yes.
And is that something you would like to see replicated throughout the Black community, or is at least through the Black church?
I think both.
Okay.
I don't think it's either or. I think that it has to happen, as well as there has to be a meeting of the soul. So I was not devoid of mentorship. I am the first person in my family to go through a divorce. All I know is healthy family life. So I can't cry and whimper that I didn't know my father, or I didn't see how a marriage is supposed to function or operate. I saw it on both sides of my family, and still had to find myself in Jawanza Kanjufu's book, To Be Popular or Smart. Am I going to do what it is that I've seen, or what it is that I want to emulate? That to go against the standard of excellence somehow diminish the authenticity of my Blackness. And so I had to really have my own, what I call bro mitzvah, of my own rites of passage that's really necessary for me to become the man that I am today.
Okay. And with that, now you are a pastor who's, in a lot of ways, it seems like you're moving in the right direction. You're moving the ministry in the right direction.
Yeah.
How is that now 1 year in with the new congregation? You're the new pastor. No matter who it is, you're the new guy on the block. How has that been, just that transition of 1 year being the new guy?
It has been the longest honeymoon in history. I think it's a marriage made in heaven, with both a pastor and people. I think it was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I'm grateful every morning that I wake up, that I'm the pastor of New Birth. And I'm excited about the challenges, the obstacles, and the opportunities.
Okay. And so now going into year two, what is something that you are planning, or at least that you're wanting to let people aware of what's going to be happening out of New Birth?
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it was Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle said that when you're dating somebody, it's two people. First you meet the representative, then you find out who they really are.
Right.
And so I think the second year is all masks are off, the gloves are off, and I can really do the work. And so this was tongue-in-cheek, the movie 50 First Dates. We, going through Groundhog's Day. And now we really begin to work through the marriage of what it is that we need to change, what it is that we need to build on, what we need to identify, what we need to deal with, and what we need to delete. And so you're getting ready to see the makeover of New Birth, inside out, and I'm excited about it.
Okay. And in regards to that, going into 2020, this is, while you're doing the makeover New Birth, there is a larger thing looming, which is this issue of the 2020 presidential election.
Yes.
Is there anything in particular that New Birth is going to be involved with in terms of either advocacy, registration, or outreach?
Yeah, we're doing a challenge and a charge to register 2,000 new voters who have been disenfranchised or disillusioned by the political system, and we're going to do it in this immediate community.
Okay. And one of the things I've noticed is that you are very intentful in terms of what you're doing immediately, not just in Atlanta, but right here where you are in Lithonia.
Yes.
That's not the norm, and unfortunately it hasn't been for a long time. What is something that could be done in Lithonia right now that people aren't doing, at least from your eyes, 1 year in?
I think that there has to be a push towards greater home ownership. A lot of the homes in this area have lost value and lost equity from abandonment or just a spiral that has happened. Somehow we have become enamored with renting and have lost that sense of community, and we've downgraded from community to hood. There are a lot of palatial manners in Lithonia that regrettably have not been kept up, or it's good here and then right across the street is a house that's falling apart. And so we've got to refortify the sense of community.
Okay, in regards to both the housing aspect of it, Atlanta is one of the most unequal places in the United States. It's one of the fastest gentrifying places in the United States.
Yes.
Is there anything that New Birth is doing, or maybe on the horizon that you might be doing in regards to either solving that or educating people about that?
Yeah, one of the things that we're looking at we're entertaining at this point, is building up affordable housing right on our property, and a novel approach to senior housing that I don't think has been done in the country. Doing senior housing for seniors who are raising their grandchildren. So most time when you look at senior housing, it's a retirement or it's glorified hospice. But when you look at the nuances of black family life, you really have multi-generational demographics that housing has not been built or suited for. And I'm prayerful that that's one of the voids we'll be able to fill.
And in regards to that, housing also is a wealth generation tool.
Yes.
You have been very emphatic about generating wealth, and not necessarily in the past tense of prosperity gospel, but in terms of like self-actualization and better economic understanding. Mm-hmm. So what is the thing that you want people to kind of understand how the church could help in that?
I think that knowledge is power. I think that something is wrong if the church only talks about economics when they ask for the tithe. If I ask for your 10%, but never tell you how you can multiply your 90%, then I am guilty of poor stewardship. The aim of the gospel is how it is that we increase what it is that we have.
Okay. Yeah. And also in terms of economic empowerment, you've been very vocal about, just even through your own social media channels, on how to educate, where to go, how to find the right things. What is something that, for let's say somebody like myself who maybe doesn't know about New Birth whatsoever, what is something that will be done for somebody like me to even just be aware that you guys are offering these type of services or knowledge?
I think that's where you'll come in, and I'm grateful, is that outlets like this allow us to really sound the alarm of what we're doing. Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers, said it's a poor frog that doesn't celebrate its own pond. And so much negative is put out about what churches are not doing that very rarely do we hear the positive things that churches are participating in.
Okay. And also on that note, Dr. Bryant, you're here, we're having a conversation. It's December. What does next year look like for you for future forecasting?
Yeah. Next year is going to be exciting. We're going to really redefine what black churches look like in America and in Atlanta. And so our theme for next year is doing things differently. As I aforementioned, we've got all this acreage that you saw. And one of the things that we're going to start doing in January is urban farming, because we've got so many food deserts that you're well intimated with, that you can get orange soda but can't get an orange. That we want to do some things that prayerfully for DeKalb County, New Birth will be a mediation center for fathers who don't have visitation, to give them access and to give them capacity to be able to be in their children's life. It's my hope that we'll be able to reach a generation who, quite frankly, has given up on church and given up on God. And so I've got 8,500 seats to fill, and I'm committed to doing it.
Okay. And now I have a couple questions that people have asked me online, have asked about you. And I'm going to ask the first of which is, one of which is, how do you deal with people who are detractors of you?
Yes.
And how do you not get derailed from the detractions in particular?
The good news is I don't want them to believe in me. I want them to believe in a God who can use somebody as flawed as me. If you are subscribing to Jamal, I'm going to let you down. I'm going to disappoint you. So the aim of the church has got to be beyond the personality and into the principle. Nobody is perfect. The difference is that you've got to be able to say that grace is available to the pastor as it is for the janitor, as it is for the usher. And even if you don't like me, there are 2,000 other churches in Atlanta. Go find one. If it was all about me, then I would lose what is the real aim of the gospel.
Okay. And one of the other questions that came up a lot was this issue of toxic masculinity, and in particular coming from the church. And to paraphrase quite a few questions to summarize into one, which is, what is going to be New Birth's role in addressing toxic masculinity.
Tell me first to define what is toxic masculinity.
Okay. Well, a few of the questions were related to either questions of how men treat women in the church or
Yes.
women being subservient. And a few of the questions were also related to how a lot of the biblical preaching, or what people were assuming, was that a wife should be either submissive to a husband without the husband being a good steward and things like that. So this is a combination of a few questions rolled into one related to
Yes.
toxic masculinity.
I find it interesting that there is no such phraseology as toxic femininity. That nobody says that when you hear a black woman say, all men are dogs, is that toxic femininity? Or if you hear mothers raising their daughters under the notion, you don't need a man, is that toxic femininity? And so I think that we've got to stop this war of one gender against the other and find out how do we embrace what Dr. King called the beloved community. So sure, there are some lapses in how it is that we move forward, but to call one toxic would suggest that the other one is whole and healthy, where we have evidence that that's not necessarily the case, because you have some ministries that go in the exact opposite, because just as you have churches that are homophobic, you have other churches that are hetero bashing. And so I think that the aim is how it is that we heal. We've got more in common than what we have apart. Sure, the church has got some miles to cover, and we've got some issues that have got to be addressed. And I don't minimize that of the questions of your viewers, but I want to know where it is that we find the common ground, and how it is that we speak to that as a place of healing.
Okay. And then I'm glad you mentioned the role of the homosexual and heterosexual community, kind of this divisiveness, because one of probably the third most asked question was some version of this, which I'm going to bring to you now. It's a paraphrase. What is particularly New Birth and also the Black church going to do to repair the relationship between the heterosexual community and the homosexual community?
I think that I can't speak for the church at large. I'll speak to New Birth and me as a pastor. I think that the Black church, New Birth, Jamal Harrison Bryant, owes the LGBTQ community an apology of repentance, because we've put grace on a short leash to say who it is available to, that we have tried to cherry pick who does God have love for, and I think that we have been terroristic, that we have driven out a complete sector and demographic of our community, quite frankly, away from God and away from the church. And I think that the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem. And so I think that we've got to take ownership of that, repent for it, and then begin dialogue.
Okay. And then another question that people had, and this is kind of rolled into one again, which is this role of people who've been hurt by the church before and let down in particular. What do you want to say to that? People who've just... That might have been the second most thing, which people wrote to me, which is I've just been hurt before in the past with the church. And the church has never given me an apology, never helped me in my time of need. So what do you want to say to people about that?
Yeah, Malcolm X said that the church is perfect. Christians messed it up. And so you're dealing with a institution that is filled with flawed and imperfect people. I use this analogy that... if you and I would leave this interview, go to a restaurant, the service was bad, the food was bad, you would not leave that restaurant and say you ain't going to eat again. You just may not eat there. So I think that we've got to take away, because I've had this bad experience at some church, that now all churches are bad. That's why you've got to find a church that will meet your need, and also be mindful that it's filled with flawed people. Everybody at the gym is not healthy. Everybody at the gym is not in shape. But everybody at the gym is working towards a goal.
Okay. And I want to leave it right there, Dr. Bryant, which is now I want to open it up for you. Is there anything in particular you want people to know about yourself that they get kind of misconstrued, or they may have gotten it wrong?
Yeah. I think that when you live in public space and you live out loud, you don't have the benefit of a filter. And so you've got to live through all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so I live a life in public that I don't have the benefit of editing. There are things that I wish that I could have done differently, said differently, processed differently, that I didn't. But what God has allowed me to do is to go through my own maturation in public space. And so I pray that people who have watched my evolve, my transformation, are witnessing what God's grace can do on somebody who's flawed and broken.
Okay. And before we get out, I asked the same question to every one of the persons I've interviewed,
Yes.
which is two things. The first question is, if you could change one thing, and I always kind of curtail it to what industry they're in, and particularly you're in the faith-based community.
Yes.
If you could change one thing about the faith-based community, there's no restrictions.
Yes.
Just one thing, what would it be?
That the faith-based community would understand that 93% of what Jesus did was outside of the church. That our real ministry is what we do, not around the pews, but around the corner. And so I wish more of our churches would become involved and engaged in what's taking place in the community.
Okay. And the last question I ask every one of my interview guests is, what's making you happy?
What's making me happy is the benefit of being in a position to serve people and to be able to speak God's name out loud and to do it in an environment that is thirsty for authenticity. I'm grateful that I'm called, that I'm chosen, and that I'm being used by God.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Bryant.
Thank you.
And how can people get in contact with New Birth? How can they figure out where it's located and things like that?
On our website, newbirth.org, as well as they can follow me on all social platforms, Jamal H. Bryant.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you once again for coming out today.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you for allowing me to interview you today.
Thank you for having me. It's an
Thank you
honor.
so much. And for everyone, I am King Williams. If you, depending on where you got this, you have either seen this at the Supporter Report, which is your official source of news and information in Atlanta. That is SAPORTA, supporterreport.com. You can read more about what I'm doing as well as what Dr. Bryant is doing in the show notes to this. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can reach me out to me on all social media channels at I am King Williams. So again, I am King Williams on all social media channels. And if you want to email me, you can email me at king@supporterreport.com. Thank you once again for Dr. Bryant. Thank you for New Birth for having me. Thank you for Eric for setting this up. And thank you for our wonderful videographer, Brandon, the Network King. He is everywhere and he's available at all times. So you can always reach out to him on all social media channels at the Network King. That's 2 Ks. So thank you once again.